And welcome back to our listeners and viewers of The Responsible Edge, the podcast exploring how to balance profit with purpose in an increasingly complex world. I'm Charlie Martin, your host, founder of TrueMark and the Anti-Greenwash Charter. And our article today is Why SMEs Can't Ignore Environmental, Social and Governance by Nicola Green earlier in 2025. This article will allow us to dig into how ESG is becoming make or break for small and medium-sized companies, especially when it comes to winning contracts. And as our regular listeners and viewers of The Responsible Edge can see, we're in very new surroundings here. We're actually recording the show from Bramall Lane, home of Sheffield United, where our guest, Jonathan Ragg, also serves as a board trustee of the club's community foundation. Jonathan, beyond being involved with the football club, is also the co-founder of LTT Group and a commercial sustainability strategist with nearly 2 decades of helping businesses turn ESG into a competitive advantage. Jonathan, it's absolutely brilliant to be joining you today for the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me on, and welcome to the Sheffield, the home of football.
Well, I have to say, we have had quite the morning already, being shown around various different parts of Bramall Lane and getting to see the amazing work that you guys are doing here at the Community Trust. So thank you for your taking us around and showing us.
No problem.
But before we go into the article for this week, and we touch on things there, I've obviously very briefly and kind of alluded to the number of different things that you're involved in.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can just give us a real flavour of your specific focus at the moment and perhaps what LTT Group is all about.
Yeah, so personally, I wear 3 hats. I am a trustee and board member of foundations. I am an NED, board member of businesses, including the CIC. But then I am co-founder of LTT Group, along with my partner, Stefan Ayon. We co-founded LTT very simply to help SMEs understand the commerciality of sustainability, not specifically ESG or carbon reduction or things like that, really at a basic level, because being a chief sustainability officer myself, being a global head of sustainability, these kind of things, you look down on your supply chain and you look down on it because you're under legislation, you have to do it. But I'm about looking up the supply chain now, looking at those smaller businesses that ultimately need to be more sustainable because it's better for the planet. They account for so many more emissions. But it's also hard for them. There's price, there's ROI, there's all sorts of things to consider. And I'm there to really drive that value from an impact, but also value from a return on that investment.
And brilliantly described. And I should say, for any of our listeners and viewers that want to go immediately to check out Jonathan's profile or LTT Group, we'll put all the various links, etc., in the various materials. But yeah, I think, and we've obviously spent the last sort of hour and a half or so before recording talking all things LTT and the brilliant work that you're doing. The thing that strikes me is how you've essentially looked at the issue and you're starting to speak the language that actually resonates with both SMEs and also with kind of corporate organizations that those SMEs might be supplying. You're starting to make the whole thing less jargon related, yes, sort of spurious or sort of, longer term, if you like, in its conception, and starting to actually look at the here and the now and the commercial reality of things. How did you come up with, was this purely through previous experience that you just observed this is how this needs to be done, or was there a moment of sort of light bulb inspiration you can recall?
Okay, I would say that I've been incredibly lucky in my career. And my career has very much been focused on a career. It's been corporate. Now, I have also been in many different industries. Now, some of that is because of contractual obligations. Some of that, when you leave a company, you can't go to a competitor. Some of that is pure and simple. There's something else to be done and there's a better job elsewhere and you go into that industry. The other thing of that as well is, well, I've sort of felt guilty and never wanted to go to a competitor in these instances. And it's all of that. I am one of the first people to say that my career is a complete fluke. Where I am now is definitely not where I started off when I joined the Royal Navy at 16. But ultimately, it's about taking those experiences and learning lots of things. And they can all learn from each other. What I've found is a lot of people and a lot of industries are very siloed. And they are very inward looking. People in the construction industry for 25 years only really know that industry But they have to look beyond that to understand their supply chain and value chain, because the people supplying them are in different industries. They're in the manufacturing industry. They don't class themselves. You're just one customer of 100, one customer of 1,000. It's about understanding that. Now, one of the things that I would say I do best, apart from talk, if anybody knows me, one of the things that I would do best is it's the language and it's the translation of sustainability. All right. ESG is amazing, but it's a framework. But that's often lost the further down the value chain you go. My local supermarket, for example, have no idea what that is, but some of the brands that they sell talk about sustainability and being a sustainable product. Okay. There's also the B2C and B2B environments are incredibly different. I'm lucky that I've seen the legislation get stronger and stronger and stronger. And people like me who are impact first and sustainability led will probably be the first to say the impact doesn't, the legislation doesn't go far enough yet. But actually, if you're a small to medium business and you're manufacturing something, say, in plastic, well, you'll say already it's too strict. It's too strong. I can't keep up. I can't keep up with costs. What is this giving me back? It's about that language. And then for foundations and charities, well, actually, a lot of their money comes from corporate donations. But because of the rise in CSR and ESG and things like that, they have to then speak that language. So I help the Sheffield United Community Foundation, for example, reach out to their corporate partners and show them why it aligns to their goals, aspirations, social impact strategy, the SDGs it aligns to, for example. It's things like that that actually, historically, the charity sector has never been good at. So it's all about those three different languages. You've got board, strategic, operational. Then also through that, you've got operational businesses, you've got foundations and strategy and everything that comes with that. Everybody just wants to grow. For me, the only way a business can grow is being more sustainable, because climate change is real as far as I'm concerned. I know that. I know these things. I see it with my own eyes. So there wasn't one single light bulb moment for me. It's lots of different things that have led me to go, right, we're setting up LTT Group.
It's the culmination of those experiences that's ultimately led to this point. But I think just for my apps, and then you've described it so brilliantly this morning that I just want to like regurgitate it back to you as to the absolute core of what it is that you're doing. And that is that you're allowing or enabling SMEs that are ultimately supplying corporates to understand the threat that is at the heart of them not investing in their sustainability credentials for fear of being removed from being able to supply that particular corporate.
Yeah.
That's at the heart of this.
Exactly. I don't talk about it from a sustainability and transparency point of view from the SMEs. I talk about it from a risk and impact point of view. Very simply, by your business not being more sustainable, you are seen as a high-risk supplier. You may not be, as far as you're concerned, because you're inward, you're looking at your business, whether it turns over 10 million, 50 million, 80 million, you're looking at it, you're struggling day to day, looking 6 months ahead. How can you grow as a business? But to your bigger supply chain, you're a risk. You're not proving to them that you don't have a clear modern slavery policy. You're not proving to them that you are not poisoning your local environment. You're not proving to them that you're lowering your environmental footprint whilst increasing your social footprint. Because ultimately, it's how you talk about sustainability. That's what gives you the ROI. Now it comes into the work you do with greenwashing. That's where it went too far. People jumped on the sustainability bandwagon and started adding green labels and badges and saying stuff was what it wasn't. Well, ultimately, where we are now, it's not about what you say, it's what you can prove. And that's very quickly changed. And the SMEs are behind the curve on this. Corporates are under more pressure, not just corporates, but the NHS and governments are under huge pressure to prove that they're doing what they say they're doing. Now, politics doesn't play a part in this, kind of slows things down, but it's where the money is. At top end, investors see ESG and sustainability as a risk value added. They can look at how green a business is. Will it be here in 10 years because will it be affected by climate change? Are you looking after your people? Am I about to be fined as a business because I don't meet legislation? That's ESG.
And what I find so compelling with all of this is that we're often talking, this is why you've really solved this problem for me, because we often talk about, when you're trying to convince an organization, an SME, who, as you say, has got that kind of very much shorter time frame that they're working towards in terms of their operation. When you're trying to pitch investment in sustainability as, it's going to improve your business's, resilience. It's going to improve, long-term prospect. It's going to improve the efficiency of your organization in one way or another. Those are all great, but they're not nows. They're future returns.
Yeah.
That's where this is so compelling, because it's saying, no, this isn't about a future return. This is about the here and the now.
Yeah.
And this is about whether or not that really important customer of yours is going to turn off the tap. And if they do, that's a serious strategic risk to your organization.
Absolutely.
So I think that's what I find so compelling, is that you now can package the whole thing up and say, you can realize those long-term outcomes brilliantly, but you could also protect yourself short-term.
Absolutely.
Which I think is brilliant.
The first thing we do at LTT is we work with the sales team. We identify the clients that you have right now and what is that for your revenue and what risk have you got. We'll give you a risk analysis on their spend. If one's over 60% example and you're not sustainability aligned to them, that's a real risk if they stop using you, and they will switch off the tap. Because what smaller businesses don't realize is forever and a day they've been able to get away with saying what they do in sustainability because they've been going to procurement people. But now, big businesses, sustainability people in their organization are looking into it. And trust me, we can spot fibs. And I'm changing my language here for the podcast. We can stop the actual stuff that you say, because our question, and I am a pain for this question, if somebody tells me something, my response is prove it. Simple as that. It doesn't matter. There's a good friend of mine called Alan Brown who has a wonderful book out there called $1 Million Words. And he basically says that if you can't say what you do in 10 words, it's not worth saying. Well, that's kind of the same in tenders. Always be able to add the sentence, which means what. It's great talking about that you're on a carbon neutrality journey. Or what does that mean and how? What are you doing? What are you calculating? What are you looking at? Because people are now asking, real pain in the bum people like myself are really asking, prove it. And if you can't, I'm not going to buy off you. Because this level is now adding 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. So it's fine. If you're not going to do this, expect to be 50% cheaper than your competition. Because your competition is. Well, that's also financial risk. Because you're at a low margin product anyway. The world's got tougher, we know that. National insurance has gone up, pensions contributions gone up. You need to look after your staff. Can you afford to be 50% cheaper than your competition? Well, if you can't, then you need to be a sustainable business. That cost is offset. We talk about net zero being net cost. Of course it is. Because if you can prove it right, you can go after your next big client. That's where we work with sales teams. Who are your clients now? Who do you really want to go after? We'll help you aligned.
Can I play a devil's advocate? We've gone massively off piste here,
Okay.
but it's fascinating. Playing devil's advocate, we hear a lot of murmurs and commentary about ESG backlash and the winds of North American political climate, what the impact of that, etc.
Yeah.
Is this something that is simply set to say from a regulatory perspective, or are we seeing genuinely the impact of that in terms of its impact on our RFIs, etc., and therefore its implications for SMEs currently?
Yeah, I think there's a really simple answer to that. Great. Politics plays its part, and hopefully you'll ask me the question when you give me the questions about what's an easy win for these, and I'll talk about that. But everything I'm talking about here is where the money is. Politics doesn't play an issue in where the money is. Investment in ESG has gone up to $19 trillion globally, and that's grown since Trump and the other guy from our side on the right, from over this side of the pond. That's growing. The reason for that is the money sees it as a risk factor. Politics is what? 3 to 4 year cycles. If we're lucky. Finance doesn't work like that. It's in 5, 10, 15, 20 year investment cycles, which is beyond politics.
And therefore beyond regulation.
No, because the regulation is actually coming from the money. So the London Stock Exchange have put more things in place for people on their stock exchange than government. Actually, the ones that are politically led, CSRD, CSDDD, are being held up quite significantly because there's a political game in the EU Parliament right now. But when CSDDD came to light, big businesses started looking at it going, we can really be transparent in our supply chain here. It doesn't actually matter if CSRD and SEALs Triple D come in. Corporates are starting to look at their supply chain because they started to. And that won't go because now they're spinning it into marketing. They're spinning it into sales. They're spinning it into B2B environment. They're winning work with local governments off it. This is away from politics.
That's fascinating. So in that scenario, ultimately, even the, I'm going to use the word threat, but even the prospect of regulation positioned in the right way can stimulate a view and a perspective and an attention from organizations that ultimately, regardless of whether or not regulation comes in place, it kind of spins things forward anyway.
Absolutely. I mean, just take the NHS, for example. The NHS made its carbon pledges before the Labour government. It was actually halfway through the last Conservative government. And, well, right now it's going to miss those targets. It's going to miss those targets because until very recently, it hasn't looked on its scope 3. It hasn't looked on its supply chain. And that's because looking internally was far harder than anybody thought at the beginning. And once you start down that line, start investing, start getting people internally, start getting the consultants, actually seeing the good that does, that doesn't stop. Businesses that are doing that are getting more investment than ever. You wouldn't stop that. It's increasing your share value, which ultimately makes sustainability commercial. It's not political.
Well, thank you for giving me a very strong forward defense to that question, which was brilliantly posed. Now, before we get into the article, I want to ask one personal question. You sort of touched upon the, if I may, you've touched upon your origins in the Navy, but I want to ask you not necessarily like a sort of regurgitation of the experiences that you've been through, but just in terms of like what's actually sort of driven and motivated you throughout your career. Can you put your finger on any particular kind of formative experiences that have really sort of shaped your view of the world, and what led you to wanting to operate and wanting to grow and develop a career in sustainability?
Okay, the career in sustainability came accidentally, completely. I know we'll talk about that a little bit further down the line, but my work ethic comes from my parents straight away. So as I was growing up, both my parents worked hard. My dad worked his way up in a fabrication company to being the MD of that fabrication company. He started there very young. He actually only worked for one company his whole life, which was amazing. And I see that. But one thing that drives me now is if my dad's company, and he's now moved on with regards to retirement, so he's passed that work on. But if my dad's company was a supplier, I wouldn't buy off my dad's company because he can't afford to be as sustainability and transparent as a fabrication company that I need to be under legislation. So I need to work with people like my dad's company. Simple as that. That's what drives us. Then my mum worked sometimes 2-3 jobs at a time, whether that was bar work, whether working supermarkets, whatever. She was very manual labour intensive with regards to that. And that's a great work ethic when you're a kid to see that. I didn't do so well at school. I wasn't great at school. It wasn't my focus. Well, I was definitely quite boring. And therefore it didn't drive me. So I went in the Navy at 16. It's not that they beat it out of you, but they give you a sense of ethics in the armed forces. It's very much always do the right thing, even when people's not looking.
And you didn't have that before you went in the Navy?
No. I was very much a typical 90s, early noughties kid. And I was going out and doing things that you do when you're going out because it was very different back then. And that was where I'm going to United football matches all the time. And that's where all my wages went. And it went on the beer and lager and everything else because that was the culture back then, very much FHM, lads culture. And you do that. But that shapes you as well. I hold that and then look back at that time. It was amazing. But for me, that was only yesterday. And it turns out it was 25, nearly 30 years ago, which is terrifying. But ultimately, those things are what shape you. The Navy shaped me to give me work ethic at a hard place. Doing the right thing when nobody's looking. Being there for the person to the left of you, because that's who you've got to rely on. And always looking out for the person at the side of you. Not just those above you, but those on the same rank of you and below, and understanding that value. Being able to walk in a room and do a presentation at the top of the shop in the ship. So ultimately doing the presentation when you're only a 16, 17-year-old guy in front of somebody who's done 24 years and has a lot of stripes on his elbow. Well, that teaches you how to talk at boardroom level and things like that. And I just brought that with me. What it did also bring when I came into the civilian world was a lot of arrogance and a lot of stuff like that. And that kind of changes because you have to be more, and you get your sense of urgency. And that's where the sustainability journey started. Started on a social level, started wanting to do things with charities, wanting to do things with that. But then I went to work for a plastic manufacturer who was selling...
Sorry, Jonathan, sorry, you're so in full flight, and apologies for interrupting you, but so just talk us through that. So sustainability was in your frame because you decided you wanted to work in the charity sector?
No, I wanted to just work ultimately, but I had a social conscience. The one thing I had in the Navy was I saw some stuff that will always live with me.
Yeah.
That kind of gives you another sense of ethics and belonging and what you want to be as a parent and blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, a job's a job, and I was looking for who was hiring. I was lucky that I've had some incredible mentors in my life. I didn't know that ESG existed when I started out on this journey. Okay. I remember, and I'm old enough to remember, the Sustainable Development Goals being the Millennium Development Goals. Mm-hmm. Okay, so everything's changed and you saw it. I was part of a team who was part of a team who was part of a team that ultimately probably came under HSQE. And that's where I started my career. But I built my corporate career equally as much as I built my sustainability career. I didn't actually get my qualifications and things like that until very much later on in my career, when I need to step up, thanks to the Open University, thanks to diplomas, thanks to people sponsoring me to do that and do it while I was at work. COVID was a big help to me. But ultimately, my whole career was really commercial. Just personally, I voted left. Personally, I took these things on. I gave money to charity. I sponsored cancer charities and things like that. It wasn't until it started aligning with the corporate world that I then started to speak it in work, which was very different. It was very different to kids I see leaving university now who have those impact degrees, have that sense of impact. It wasn't that for me at the start.
Well, it's fascinating because I speak to so many kind of senior people, you know, in similar positions to yourself, and there is this common theme that's sort of coming up where they might have done some education at an earlier, higher education when they were younger, but a lot of the time there's this mention of having gone back to university to do another degree or to do a master's or whatever else it might be, and that actually that was a key experience because essentially they were going into higher education with clarity around what they were really genuinely interested in, which allowed them to be extremely passionate and enthusiastic and driven in that piece of education that they've had, which has then enabled them to go on and have real influence in the commercial world, professional world, applying what they've learned. That sounds like that's a similar, it's a common story for people.
It is. It absolutely is, and it definitely is for me. If I look back at my career now, quite selfishly, everything I've learned was so that I could take that next step on the career ladder. And it turns out that I'm very lucky that whilst I've also learned about impact and I've learned about sustainability and I've done all of those things, well, quite lucky. And like I said at the beginning, my whole career is a fluke, that as I've progressed in the corporate world, I've also progressed with my knowledge in what sustainability is quite significantly over the past 20 years. Well, as that's come to the forefront, but it could have easily not come to the forefront, easily not, and therefore, well, I'd never speak about it. I'd still be speaking about sales or whatever that is, or whatever the next trend is, because that's how you get on with your corporate career. I am struggling to not talk about AI right now, because that's at nearly every boardroom meeting that I have. It's at every meeting that I attend. People are seeing AI. I'm very much sticking to the sustainability guns and the bandwagon, and we bet everything on LTT, and we're going with that. So yeah.
I love it. Well, look, I could literally, I think, create a whole show just about peering into your background and experience. But for now, we'll move forward. So the article was Why SMEs Can't Ignore Environmental, Social and Governance by Nicola Green in 2025. Just give us a flavour of what's covered in the article.
Yeah, so it's very much geared around the aerospace and defence space and their supply chain. And the organisations that wrote this, whether they sponsored it or whatever, they're geared up to around the aerospace and the defence sector. A lot of their larger customers are involved at those sections, whether that be like Airbus or the Ministry of Defence, etc., or Boeing and that kind of thing. But it actually did something that quite a lot of these industry-specific blogs and posts miss. They actually did a really good job of generalising it here as well. So you could take that and learn from it. But there are points of contention there for me with regards to that. And it's nothing against the supply chain partners themselves. I've not come across them. They're not in my field of view because I'm not working in that. And I can see the value of being members of that and things like that. But it does a really good job of generalizing ESG. Well, I've got an issue with that for myself. I think ESG hinders SMEs because ESG is the framework that tracks your sustainability stuff, okay? And people get confused about it all the time. I mean, if I look on my LinkedIn feed, at least 2 posts a week or somebody going, somebody's just called sustainability ESG, or somebody's just called CSR ESG, or because they're mixing up the terms. But they're mixing up the terms, guys, it's just pretty complicated unless you're entrenched in it and it matters to your job role, okay? They're mixing up the terms because it's on trend. They're mixing up the terms because it's everywhere and they just don't understand it. I don't understand finance that well. I know enough to do a P&L, I can do budgeting, but I'm not about to submit accounts. That's why we have accountants. Sustainability is the same. It's a specialist subject. So, of course, they're mixing it. So you shouldn't be frustrated, but you're talking a different language to the people that you're worried about saying it. I wouldn't talk about them and saying ESG on an SML, saying ESG can help SMEs only if they're supplying corporates. It helps SMEs on their supply chain that they're selling their services into as the supply chain partners because their corporates are talking about ESG. But it's not helping the SMEs directly, is it? Because you're asking them instantly to track 3 pillars that they don't understand. They're asking them to invest in something. You're adding another badge and another cost to something that I can't see an ROI in. Once again, it doesn't get rid of the complication.
And, when we spoke about at the beginning about your sort of observation around, how LTT resolves that issue, if you like, and makes the whole prospect of investing in your sustainability initiatives as an SME something that becomes, it feels like the barriers, if you like, are reduced in terms of the cost, the complication, the quality of understanding that's required. Is that a fair?
I don't think it reduces the cost because I'll be the first to admit, okay, there is a green tax on stuff, but I don't believe in a lot of them. People add margin to stuff because it's greener, and I don't think that should exist. But ultimately, corporates and large businesses not only are looking 3, 5, and 10 years with their sustainability and ESG, they can afford ESG as a framework because it's quite long-winded, it's quite complicated, it's got lots of things. But what they can really do is afford to make mistakes. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago in the logistics industry, and they were talking about learnings that they'd made and mistakes that they made on their carbon reduction journey. Great. They have huge cash flows and they have teams to be able to make those mistakes and staff. I'm an SME looking 3 to 6 months. I can't afford to make those mistakes. So every bit of investment needs to be key to my business growth. Okay. So will I make it cheaper? No. What we'll say at LTT is we talk about transparency, integrity, impact. We'll be very transparent about speaking with your sales, where you need to align to your current clients. But if you really want to grow and go after these bigger clients, this is what you need to do. But that's why it's an investment worth making. That's why there's ROI, because without these things, whether it is a proper carbon reduction plan, not just talked about, but really done and tracked and invested in, a biodiversity protection plan, a social impact and added value social impact strategy, real governance from top down, from your owners down to your shop floor, to the accreditations you have to back up what you say. It's about doing it right. I'm not about to say, Mr. Business, you need this ISO, this ISO, this ISO, this ISO, and this ISO. Well, what's the point if their clients aren't asking for it? They're great once you're established and once you grow and you see the value of these things. But ultimately, you're like, well, if you supply the finance industry, you need ISO 27001. But they're also looking at risk. So if you've got a site, ISO 14001 is really good as well. And the build outs from that at a strategic cost. What I love to do with SMEs is put the project plan in place. Don't say you're on a carbon neutrality journey straight away, because you might not be. When you look at it, it's really complicated. But you're starting on your journey. It's not how good you are. It's about the journey you're on and being honest and transparent about where you are on that journey. Talk about your ambition, talk about your goals, but just be honest and say, right now we are struggling with this because of these factors. Fantastic.
Here. You're going to get your first here of the show. We, as you were describing that, I was thinking our green claims policies have a mandatory section at the beginning of every single one titled Where We Can Improve. And for us, it's about being upfront and clear and honest about where you are in terms of progress to liberate you as a brand to be able to talk confidently about what you're doing well. And that's the key sort of impact of being open and honest, transparent about perhaps some of the challenges at play.
I think impact's a key word. I would say, and whether my former employers speak differently or whatever, one of my most recent employer, Promenade, effectively, they are a group of SMEs that supply printed merchandise and wonderful merch like this or what depends on merch into corporate clients. They do it on a global scale. So not just on an individual scale, there's lots of those guys. Promenade are a group of businesses around the world that come together for one united purpose. One of the things I did very early on was sit down with the sales director, look at what we were saying and not say it was wrong, but just say, every time you submit a tender, you're talking about it differently. So how can marketing understand how to talk about it? How can your clients really understand where you are? So what we did very early on was put our flag in the sand and say, this is what we're going to do. And it's going to take this amount of time and this amount of investment, where effectively everything we've done before has done good up to now, but we're really going to start from scratch. Just like you would do on a project change plan. If your technology is behind, things like that. It's about actually making it hit home and give ROI. And we know that worked for our clients because we were selling to corporate clients. But what it really did was make it clear and simple to people who weren't sustainability trained. It's nothing against the sales guys. The sales guys want to sell. Therefore, if sustainability sells, then they can. But what's really easy is if they understand the story, it's an executive summary and it's the same story. But as you hit those journey hit marks and you actually do well, they've got a new thing to add on. So this is our journey. 3 months later, we've now done this on that journey. It's the same journey, but we've now taken that next step. And we've now got that accreditation on that step. It's the same project. Doesn't matter whether you do it by a Gantt chart, whether you do it by a project plans, whatever. It's the same thing.
And there's almost, from what you're describing here, because I think for any SMEs that are listening in and considering this, it's such a novel way of viewing investment in this area, in the sense that to start with, pinpoint those key clients that you either have that you want to maintain or prospects that you want to work with, and understand specifically what they need from you in order to buy from you, essentially. And what's fascinating in what you're describing is there an opportunity that's almost the starting point, if you like, for SMEs. And then once you've sort of sown the seed of investment in these areas, it's likely that regardless of what pressures are coming perhaps from customers or prospects they're wanting to work with, there might be a degree of it becoming a cultural norm within the organization to want to continue to develop in these areas. Is that, you're smiling at me, so I'm suggesting that this is possibly an outcome that you're hoping to stimulate as well.
It'll become a cultural norm because it's commercially viable.
Of course.
Simple as that. GDPR and HR and marketing and all these things, I'm old enough to remember when a lot of these things came into the world, and they were bolt-ons or they were additions or whatever, until you started to see the commercial value of that. HR was seen as a bit of a pain until fines started landing because legislation got tight and you then had to prove that you had these policies. Now it's embedded. Now everybody just as standard talks about HR. Okay, that's where sustainability is at SME level. Okay, it is still very much, they're still seeing it as a trend and a bolt-on. Well, my world and the sustainability world, we're talking about embedding sustainability. Actually, it's not a thing until it's embedded. Well, what they're not doing is saying how to embed it. Well, how you embed it is what's grassroots. Well, growth and money. Can you increase their revenue and their EBITs? Yes. You'll keep their EBITs because they won't have to be cheaper than the competition because they'll be more sustainable. So that ultimately gives them better scoring and more criteria because you've aligned perfectly to what they want. You've not gone off and guessed. We'll help you speak the corporate language. because that's what we do. We speak the corporate sustainability, weird and wonderful language, but then make it very simple, as far as we're concerned, into strategic and transparent goals that you should hit to get that work.
How, and it's brilliantly positioned again, and I think we've nailed this point in terms of how this thinking, but it's great to talk it through in this much depth and detail, because I think it really clarifies it. The article's title was why SMEs can't ignore ESG, essentially. How many SMEs, in your experience, are still ignoring ESG?
I think if they were being honest, most of them. And I think the thing you've got to understand is the term SME is incredibly vague. Because what's that? Anything up to 100 million? There is a huge difference between a manufacturing business turning over 30 million and a manufacturing business turning over 60 million. It is. Okay. These things, just like in finance and what they have to hit with tax and everything else, there are huge differences. So look at those teams. If you also see it from I'd flip that switch and say, HR is a must for these businesses. Well, not if they're a sole trader.
Ooh.
A sole trader is equally on a supply chain of a corporate as much as a $60 million if you're going to go under SMEs. And people forget the S part of SMEs, the small businesses. But they're actually the ones that really need to be upskilled and trained. They're only going to do this if there's money in it. And they're only going to do it from a commercial standpoint. It's just another trend.
Jonathan, I do love asking you questions because you have a brilliant way of saying, I'm going to take your question, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that we completely recategorize the notion of SME, which is a brilliantly...
I would love to.
I think it's a great idea. What's, just because I'm interested, what's the difference between a micro business and an S of an SME?
Well, it's the next one down.
It's the next.
So, the word micro just stands with regards to that. And I'm not a finance expert. I'm not going to give you an actual breakdown of what those terms are. But I think the term SME is very much like the term sustainability. It means something different to different people in different businesses and different organizations.
Which is where we just create absolute confusion across, well, what are we actually talking about?
But if you look at some of the corporate pledges on sustainability and supply chain transparency, they just talk about SMEs as the whole thing and getting them upskills and transparency in supply. Well, that's completely fine if they're an 80 million and they've got the staff to do it and the time to fill out these forms that you're constantly doing it. But they still see it as a pain in the butt. What you need to really do is talk about what it'll mean for them continuing purchasing from them. And then the corporates and the large organizations are not being transparent enough because they don't want to get around procurement rules. There's obviously things like that. You can't give favoritism. You're still going to have open and honest procurement terms. But you need to be honest on what scoring should be around having a certain accreditation.
Let me ask you one final, slightly, before we get to Magic One, one final slightly off the beaten track question from the conversation that we're having. Are you confident that this form of incentive for organizations to invest in sustainability and becoming more sustainable as corporate entities, are you hopeful that this is going to realize the kind of change that we need on a macro level? Is this the way that we get capitalism in order to help us deliver these kind of outcomes? Or if you have concerns about the system itself, i.e. the role that capitalism plays in resource extraction, et cetera, et cetera?
I think yeah, okay. So as a person right now who impacted the core of what we do, I am massively concerned about extraction and the corporates. However, as a realist and somebody who's gone through the corporate world, I'm just choosing not to partner with those guys right now. But I still very much know that they have far more power than any of the governments of the world. And if we don't align to them and get them on board and work with them, well, actually, we're not going to get anywhere. Look at the Paris Agreement and where that is right now. The UN have just announced that 1.5 is impossible. But COP30 is still happening. COP30 is still happening. The US, China and India aren't there. So what's the point? It's now just a boys' club. But there are other things happening. There are business meetings happening where they're looking at it and going, I can get extra investment if I'm more sustainable, so I will be. Yes, they're still extracting, and big oil is a real problem, and these guys are big problems in the world. And when I talk about aligning to big businesses, I think there'll become a time where SMEs have to make that choice. Not all money is good money. But right now, if you genuinely want it to make an impact, okay, and like I want to do with my business, I'm doing it as an impact first. I look outside of my window in Sheffield, and it's full of manufacturing businesses. Okay, there's some big businesses in Sheffield. Predominantly, it's manufacturing businesses. Think of the unemployment that will come if those businesses don't keep hold of their large contracts. Well, that terrifies me personally from an impact point of view, from a member of the Sheffield community, from somebody who's really proud of having northern roots. It's not about it just being in London. It's not about that. It's about being beyond and looking at the north. Every city should be looking at this, thinking about it and going, well, actually, the SMEs play a key part in this. I just want to show them the commercial value of being more sustainable, because it will help the big boys in the long run. Ooh.
Here. You're going to get your second here of the show, John. I love it. I love it. Right, let's conclude now. And you kind of touched upon a couple of, I guess, magic wandy sort of based insights, but I'm going to give you one shot with the ultimate magic wand. If I was to hand you one and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
Minimum 60% scored on CSR. Did change the world instantly. With named accreditation and what you mean by that, and what you actually mean by what you expect them to have. Holding people at account when they've also tendered and won work.
I mean, absolutely. It seems for a man who is a Wordsworth, that is an incredibly concise and clear, and not that you're not clear in everything else that you say, but that's an incredibly concise position.
I also said it without swearing, Richard.
No, you did. Yeah. And actually, have we sworn at all on this?
No.
We've managed to stay clear of it, which has been bloody impressive. I'm both saying.
Listen, mate.
But let me ask you this. So, okay, on that. So if just talk us through the implications of that. If we have 60%, what's the percentage at the moment? Would you say, just as a general take, like where are we?
Well, in the private world and the private sector, it's up to them. I can tell you now that GIFGAF, a friend of mine who was a former colleague, was at ProcureCon, so a big procurement event, and GIFGAF announced that they did a very large tender for lots of stuff, 90% CSR.
Wow.
And actually, they found that prices came down.
Wow.
Yeah, because all of a sudden it wasn't a price drive, but people then saw who weren't so good that the prices were there, but they still won. It was 90% score. You still got 10% on price, but they haven't spent more doing that. But it has improved all of their thing, and what they've actually saved. They've got transparency in their supply chain. They've got better supplies. They've got better products. They've got cleaner. Blah blah. They've ticked all these boxes very quickly without really spending much more. If you look at the likes of some of the other big boys out there, so whether that is the NHS or whether that is Michelin or these guys, well, actually, their tenders are heavily focused on CSR. There's not fixed percentages in some cases, but the Public Procurement Act and the new Public Procurement Act is going to be huge in this space. People who supply local authorities or the NHS or public procurement are really looking at it now going, oh, wow, here's a differentiator, because they no longer have to just say it, they have to be able to prove it, and all the way through their supply chain as well. So it's really affecting construction. And
just when that was brilliantly explained, and then in your magic wand response, you also said that it's not just about the RFIs having that percentage in place for CSR related activity, but you said it's about holding them to account, suppliers to account. How is that done?
There's lots of portals out there. If you want your supply chain to be on carbon, okay, and a carbon journey, okay, reducing carbon journey, then emphasize the importance of CDP. Don't just use terms like aligning to the Paris Agreement of 1.5.
Be specific.
Be very specific what that means. Because if you say, within 3 years of winning this contract, you must be rated B on CDP, that is incredibly specific, but it gives the guys a 3-year target. They then start working backwards from where they are now. Right, how do we get that? What does that mean? That is a very clear project plan. EcoVadis is an amazing accreditation for that. Just saying you have EcoVadis is a great leveler right now to get you on the supply chain. But I also expect very quickly that the next round of tenders, that question will slightly change. It'll be silver echo bodies, or whatever they see as their baseline. It'll be the next step up, gold echo bodies, because it's that risk factor. It's taking it that next step. You can't just instantly go on and say, I want my supply chain to be platinum echo bodies. It won't work. It's a rubbish pledge, and it's an absolute load of that's very rubbish. But actually starting with, I want my supply chain to have echo bodies and CDP, and I'll look favour on ISO 14000, whatever it is, 27001.
Signatory status of the Entrepreneur's Charter.
Exactly, that big mouthful. But with regards to anything like that, well, that gives them clear purpose. But it can't be to win the tender, you have to have this. Hold them to account and have regular check-ins. It's not a purchasing decision then, it's sustainability and a purchasing decision. It's commercial, but it's also sustainability led, and it'll help you in the long run.
Fantastic. Jonathan, I could ask you many more questions, but we have obliterated our times for the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. That was a brilliant conversation.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers, mate.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Jonathan Ragg and the whole of the Sheffield United family for facilitating today's show. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by TrueMark, the mark of trusted communications. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin, and thank you for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.